Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Finally, the long-awaited inauguration of President Trump is complete and he's back on the job and very busy already. I do expect he will do great things. One thing that needs to happen is shrinking the federal government / reducing federal government overreach. That's not something that we as a state have to wait on Trump to do or should really expect of him. It was reported that he will issue about 100 EOs his first day in office, executive orders. No doubt many of them will be reversing insane and unconstitutional EOs issued by President Biden. But the very fact that the federal government is that intrusive is a reminder how abused and ignored our Constitution has become. The only way to restore the Constitution is for the states to reclaim their sovereignty and limit the federal government to its constitutional limits. The best way to do that is nullification, something we have talked about on this show quite a bit. Our guest tonight is Representative Bud Hulsey, here to discuss the nullification process bill that he intends to refile this session, as well as other legislation designed to protect our sovereignty and our finances. Representative Hulsey, thank you for coming on there, being with us tonight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Well, let's get right to it. Give us a reminder for those who may have forgotten or those who are maybe just listening for the first time, kind of an overview of the highlights of the bill as far as what the bill does.
Okay. Nullification is a process that I believe, and I think the founders believe, that all 50 states have. It's a right when the federal government overreaches unconstitutionally. And most of the time their overreach is in areas that they have no business in constitutionally. You and I have discussed before, I think a year ago on another program, how that Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution only gives the government about 18 things that they can mess around in. Absolutely everything else is left up to the power of the people of the states. And so nullification says when the federal government overreaches in areas that they constitutionally are not supposed to be in, that belong to the state, and they tie them down with onerous rules or regulations and those kinds of things, that the state has a right to say, we're not going to do that here. And I've been accused of running a bill that's pushing rebellion and secession, and I've been accused of a whole lot of stuff. But all it does, all nullification says is we're just not going to do that here. Yeah. And the bill that I have doesn't force the legislature to nullify anything. Right. It just says, if you choose to nullify, here's 5 ways you can do it, and that's all the bill does.
Right. You know, and that's the thing, too. I don't understand this mindset that, well, okay, if you think the federal government's overreached, you have to go to the federal court and get a federal judge to agree with you. That's insane. Why would you write out the Constitution? Why would you bother writing limits for the federal government? Why would you, in Article 1, Section 8, why in Article 1, Section 10 would you say the specific things that the states can't do? And then you have, of course, the Bill of Rights and the 9th and 10th Amendments. 9th and 10th Amendments make reference to rights and powers that are retained by the people in the states. So why have that if every time the federal government overreaches, you've got to go begging, groveling to the federal courts to get the federal government to stop? That whole thing, it makes no sense to me. And I don't think the founders ever intended it to be that way.
I don't either. Most of the arguing most of the points against nullification come from boys that's been to law school, and we got several of them down the legislature, and I like them. They're good boys, but they've been taught wrong. Yeah. And they've been taught essentially, and when I say to them, so what you're saying is we have a 10th Amendment that says what powers are not enumerated to the federal government, these 18, are retained by the states. But what you're saying is, I've got a 10th Amendment right, but a state can't exercise it till they get permission from 5 people on the court.
Yeah.
Well, then it's not a right. It's not a right.
Yeah, it's meaningless. That belief, the belief that the federal government is, that any federal bill trumps any state bill, and the idea that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter means that the rest of the Constitution is worthless. It means absolutely nothing. You have no recognized rights. There are no limitations on the federal government. It's every time you're just going to have to go and beg and grovel before the federal courts for them to maybe decide in your favor. And they do occasionally. I mean, and they have done so more lately on certain things, but that's not the point. The point is they don't have the power. Federal government doesn't have the power. But we've been brought to believe that for decades now. All your lawyers believe it, all but maybe 1% of them. And it just perpetuates this insanity. And that's why we're in the mess we're in. Financially as a country, that's why we're in the mess we're in. You got the federal government doing all these things they're not authorized to do.
Yeah, I think that a big failure is the paradigm that we've been taught, like you said. And what we've been taught is that the Constitution provides rights for American people, and that's really not the case. Rights are given by God. What the Constitution does, and the reason that it was ratified, is it was chains to bind down this newly created, they called it a central government, not a federal government, but it was binders, chains to bind down the federal government so they couldn't trample on states' rights.
Yep.
That was the whole reason for the Constitution is these are going to be binders on what you can and cannot do.
Yep.
And I think we've gotten away from really looking at it that way. And when you see it that way, then you understand that rights by our Declaration didn't come from any parchment. They came from God Almighty. The Constitution binds down the federal government to keep them from taking away from you.
Yeah.
And keep them in their lanes. But it's up to the states really, and the federal government's supposed to be taxed with preserving the rights that God gave, but it falls more on states. And to me, if we're going to survive, states have to.
Yep.
They have to protect the liberty of their people.
Absolutely, yeah. And we see what happens when they don't, what happens when they defer. I mean, okay, we may win a case here and there, but you lose when you defer an authority to somebody that doesn't legitimately have it, and that's what we've done with the federal courts. And of course, the federal government in general. Of course, I blame the Congress a lot because the Congress, they can limit the appellate jurisdiction of the federal courts, which that's where a lot of the abuses have come from, is through the appellate courts. Not all, but a lot of them have. But so we agree that, and it's no surprise, anybody's watched this show, we agree that the federal government's out of control and the states have to put it back in. And we talked about your bill, and it's not a bill, just so anybody who's not familiar with it, it's not a bill that says we're going to nullify X, Y, and Z. It is just a bill that creates 5 different processes for federal legislation, federal policy, federal court, whatever, that they don't have the authority according to the Constitution, that these are processes for how we will consider repealing it, or nullifying it. And like you said,
Right.
it doesn't say we have to nullify anything, but this is processes that we'll use. And of course, the first one that's listed in the bill is the governor can issue orders, executive orders, in reference to that or whatever whether it's legislation, whether it's a court decision, whether it's a regulation, whatever. Well, I know some people are concerned. They're like, well, I don't want to give that power to the governor. Well, The governor already has the authority to issue an executive order because the executive order only applies to the executive branch, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
So, and if he was acting if he were out of line with something like that, I don't think it would take too long in the Tennessee legislature for them to say, hey, you know, we're not going to back you on this. And you guys still control the purse, right?
We do, and I got sideways with his office back in COVID days. And listen, I like the governor awful well. I really do. He's a good man. I got sideways with his office over executive orders came out of COVID, and I argued with him. And I said, you know, the executive branch doesn't have constitutional authority to do that.
Right.
And I was told, oh yes, he does. The legislature passed a bill back in 2002, the Emergency Powers Act, that gives him the authority to do that. And I said, then that bill is faulty and unconstitutional on its face, because constitutionally the legislature does not have the authority to make a lawmaker out of somebody else.
That's right. That's right.
So at the end of the day, the executive branch can't make law. And it's a separation of power issue, but he has authority over the executive branch. That's just right. Like you pointed out. So if the federal government made a mandate to the executive branch of the state of Tennessee, under my bill, he'd have every right. If it was an unconstitutional edict, he would have every right to say, we're not doing it here.
Right. And of course, that would only, you know, that would apply to the executive branch. So yeah, that one's, it's not giving him power that he doesn't already have. And then the next one is a single legislator could, if he felt something that came from the federal government was unconstitutional, then instead of going through the normal process like bills go through the committee process, he writes it up, gives it, and tell me if I'm off here, but he writes it up and he will present it to the Speaker of the House. And for so many days, within so many days, there has to be a full hearing by the legislature on the issue he brought up, right?
Right, on a nullification bill. Yeah, it's kind of unique. There are time frames in there, but there's also other restrictions. It can't be killed in a committee.
Right.
Now you can assign it to a committee and haggle it over and wrestle about it, but you can't kill it in a committee. And when it has to go to the House floor and the Senate floor for a vote.
Right.
It doesn't tell you how you got to vote, of course, but it has to go for a vote.
Right.
And it can't be ditched or shut out some other way.
Right. And they would basically have two different things to decide. First off, they would have to decide, the legislature would have to decide if they agree with that legislator that, yeah, hey, this action by the federal government, whether it's through the courts, whether it's regulation, executive order, whatever, is unconstitutional. And then they would have to decide what they do about it. That would take separate legislation to actually decide what they're going to do about it, right?
Right. Well, it should be in their bill that the legislator files it. You know.
Okay. So he presents it with a remedy then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The bill should already say we're not doing this.
Right. Yeah, we're not doing it. Okay, it's unconstitutional. We're not doing it. And if they were going to take any additional action beyond that, and the reason one of the things I bring that up for is, even though these guys up there want to act like this is unheard of, I need to remind everybody, SJR 90005 in October of 21, it was a special session. It was during the COVID garbage, a joint Senate resolution that told the federal government, this is over some of the COVID garbage the federal government was pushing, that we have the right and the responsibility as a state to nullify unconstitutional federal action, whether it be executive order, whether it be legislative, whatever. We have that right. And oh, by the way, we're not limited to court action. We're not limited to going and groveling before the court. We can use our legislature to put up obstacles. That's what was in the language of that resolution that they all now try to act like it doesn't exist.
Well, 64 House members signed it.
Right, and pretty much every senator, well, every Republican senator, except maybe one.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's a great point. And we've made this too in other states. Other states have nullified lots of things. And like I said, it's just saying we're not doing that here. There's other states that have said that to the federal government, you criminalized marijuana. We're not doing that here. Yeah. And they made marijuana legal in their state and tax it and grow it and smoke it and sell it and that's nullification. I mean, you had, I think, 15 years ago when they first started talking about the real ID.
Yep.
I think there were 18 states that said if you try to do this, we're going to nullify that. And so for the last 18 years, the federal government's been giving them money and buying their votes. And so now you got a real ID that's going in place next May.
Yeah. Any way to reverse that? Can we nullify that?
Well, I'd sure like to.
Yeah, that definitely needs it.
They're gonna force, which is another thing I don't understand. How you can have a commodity that you tell me that if I don't have the real ID, that everybody else can buy this commodity except me. I can't go buy an airline ticket if I don't have a real ID. But what's the difference in that and telling me that I can't go buy groceries if I don't have a particular national ID?
Maybe this is just the first step of that. Realize that may be down the road. So I hope there is some pushback on that. That we don't need that. That's just, it's totally un-American in my opinion.
But that started out. I'm telling you, like there were 18 states that will nullify that.
Oh yeah.
We won't do that here.
Yeah.
So it's not a thing that's that's like completely foreign and new. This states have pushed back every now and then. It's pretty rare, but they have, and they say we're just not doing it.
Yeah. And I'm no fan of the courts, but even the courts have historically recognized what's known as the anti-commandeering principle, which means they already cannot make a state use its resources to fulfill to do a federal program. They already can't do that. Okay, so that the states have some level of even some level recognized by the Supreme Court. I think we have a whole lot more than we've allowed ourselves to believe. So the other method is in the court. A state judge could determine if something is unconstitutional, and then it would apply. Am I correct in understanding that it will apply just to that case? Correct?
That's correct. Just the particular case he's on, in that particular instance, yeah. If he determines that in his conscience that part of what he's hearing that's in this bill or this case in front of him is unconstitutional, he can act on that. And of course, juries have had that right to do the very same thing. You just don't hear about it anymore.
Yeah. I need to do a show. I need to do a show on jury nullification. That's a good topic.
But yeah, a judge can do that.
Now, let me ask you: if a judge does that, is there any? I don't remember anything in the bill about him taking that issue to the legislature to have them review it. It's just they'll just have to deal with it because they'll have had a judge that found this to be unconstitutional. So I guess it would just automatically fall back on them to decide what to do, right?
That's exactly right. It'd be just for that only that one case that he's hearing, and it's a specific thing that he believes that it's unconstitutional, and then he acts on it because he swore to uphold it, just like you and I did, which was Andrew Jackson's argument.
Yeah.
If you're gonna make me swear to it, then I got to obey what I swore to.
Yeah. People act like the only people that took an oath to the Constitution that counts is the court. Well, no. The executive takes an oath. all the members of the legislative body, whether it's state legislature or U.S. House, they all take an oath to uphold the Constitution, and not the Constitution as the most, as per the most recent Supreme Court decision. I mean, that it was not intended for them to be the arbiters of what the Constitution means. Otherwise, why bother having anybody else take an oath? We'll just wait and see what the court says, and then we'll figure it out. We'll change it. We'll change it in 20 years or 60 years. Seems like 60 years is the norm. About every 60 years, something that was supposedly settled law and, Supreme Court said, well, we changed our mind.
Yeah, I know. That's, I've always believed, if you're law enforcement, police and deputies and any law enforcement agency, you got to operate in your state. If they know the Constitution, they understand the Constitution, then they're the folks who actually protect constitutionally the counties and the cities that they work in. And I always took the position, I was in law enforcement for 36 years, that if the state passed a law that I believed was unconstitutional, that I would not enforce that. And I ran a bill down there in the middle of COVID because I was afraid of this happening. I ran a bill that said you cannot use police power to enforce executive orders.
Yep.
And we went through that and got it all the way up to the House floor, and it failed in the Senate. But I was afraid, not really of the governor. I wasn't afraid of him doing it, but I was afraid of mayors doing it. Right. And sure enough, you had some mayors telling their police to write tickets to people who weren't wearing a mask.
Yeah. Out of control. That's scary. And people, anyway, some people thought that was legitimate.
Well, that's to the point of people understanding what the Constitution says and the people taking an oath to uphold it. Well, if you don't want me doing that, then don't make me take the oath.
Right, absolutely. And then the other two ways is if 10 municipalities or 10 counties decide that they think something is unconstitutional, they'll petition the legislature, and they will take it. It'll be heard on the floor, and they'll make a decision based on that. And the last one is 2,000 registered voters fill out a petition, and it would be sent to the Speaker of the House, and then they would vote on it. So it's not an automatic. Yeah. But those are just processes. Now, do you anticipate any changes from the bill that you ran last year?
No, actually, there was only one little phrase, and I met with or on the phone with Jeff Cobble, who actually wrote the bill, and there was just one little phrase, and we wrestled around with whether we should change that or not, and they just decided not to. So yeah, that's it. The wording is the very same as I had last year.
Okay, great. And you don't think there's any changes on the Senate side either that you know of?
Well, I certainly haven't heard of them.
And get in the House. I know the year before last, it was doing pretty good in the House.
Yeah, I think the success of it has a better chance in the House. I think there's some folks in the Senate, I think, at least from what I've heard and seen, that are not too keen on it. But I hope for success on the House side, and then I pray for success on the Senate side.
Right. Well, you did an excellent presentation year before last, or whatever House committee that was, about the bill. I think every school kid should have to listen to that, because you really wrapped it up well, and I think that was some really good information. So I hope it gets through.
Me too. I really do. If it's like I said, it doesn't make the legislature, nullify anything. But what I think it would do is, once you present it enough times, going through the committee process and on the House floor and the Senate too, to change people's in the legislature, to change their mind about what they've thought or what they've been taught to what's really true. And you know, last summer, my own newspaper up here, I think they ran three different editorials on that bill. I mean, there are places they were mocking me and picking at me pretty hard in some places that I didn't know what I was talking about and didn't know what I was doing. But it's just like people say to me, you know, don't you understand the Supremacy Clause? And I'll say, yeah, I think I do. Don't you understand the Supremacy Clause? and they have it in their head that Supremacy Clause means that anything that Congress does, yep, or any bill that they pass is the supreme law of the land, and that's, of course, not what the Supremacy Clause says. But, no. Well, you've been over that before in your program. But
there's a Supremacy Clause that's popped up there on the screen for everybody to read. And the key part of this that a lot of people overlook, most of the people, where it says the Constitution, that is the supreme law. And
that's right.
Laws passed in pursuance thereof. So
and that's the key, right?
Yeah. And then, of course, the other thing they will point to is well, Marbury versus Madison, John Marshall said that it's the responsibility of the court to say what the law is. Well, yeah, he said that, but number one, even a Supreme Court justice doesn't get to make law, and there's nothing in the Constitution that says the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of all constitutional questions. It does not say that. They're supposed to decide cases, not be an ongoing constitutional convention or a super legislature. But the other thing is, if you read all of the Marbury versus Madison decision, he emphasized in more than one place that the Constitution is the supreme. Matter of fact, the reason he was claiming he had to strike down the law in question was he said it violated the Constitution, and that the legislature could not expect the court to just go along with a violation. And the legislature should not, the court should not expect the legislature or states to go along with violation either.
Yeah, and it's like at the end of the day, it starts out with the Constitution, supreme law of the land. Then when you get to the end of it, it's like, okay, the Constitution doesn't give us the authority to decide what is constitutional, but we're going to take it anyway.
Absolutely, they ignore the. Yeah, absolutely they do. And the other thing too is their belief, that their interpretation of that, and I said this earlier, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, makes everything else in the Constitution moot. Forget your Bill of Rights. Forget any limits on the federal government. Forget anything. If the Supremacy Clause, if you follow their interpretation, the rest of it's worthless. You may as well throw it out. Doesn't mean a thing. So I don't think our founders did that to us, okay? I really don't. And here's the thing. All of the abuses that we hear of and all the justifications they point to, like the Necessary and Proper Clause, General Welfare Clause, so on and so forth, all those complaints and issues were raised up. And the people that supported the Constitution at the time said, no, that is not what it means. It does not mean that they can just pass anything they want. It has to have a power delegated in Article 1 through Section 8. So it's just, but people don't know these things. They don't bother, and they just, oh, well, I guess the lawyer knows. Oh, well, I guess the judge knows. And that's why we're in the mess we're in. Anyway, before we get to your other legislation, because you've got some other very important legislation, I just want to put this out. So if you support nullification out there, or if you're interested, you don't know much about it, you need to learn more about it, go to tncss.weebly.com. There's a petition on there you can sign. You can also sign up and get the regular notices about it. There's a lot of information on this website. Okay, we give a lot of historical documentation about nullification. There's a lot of really good information. And like I say, there's a petition that you can sign letting your legislators know that you support nullification. When we get closer, when it starts going through committee, there's going to be postcards available that you can send to the people on the committee. So just once again, tncss.weebly.com. A lot of good information there. All right. So there's some other bills that you've taken up, and let's talk first about the UCC legislation. And what most people probably don't know anything about UCC. Can you give us a quick rundown on that?
Yeah, UCC is a the Uniform Commercial Code. All 50 states have one, and they've been trying for many years. It deals with money issues that cross state lines, and they've tried for many years to try and get every state on the same page, as far as is what works best and best practices and most of that's fine. But bound up in there is one section dealing with stocks and bonds. And some of your listeners probably have read the book, The Great Taking, which is a great book to read. If they haven't, you need to read it. Shoot, fire, and I forgot. That's terrible because I've been on. He came down and testified in my committee.
David Webb. I had David Webb on the show about this time last year. Yeah.
David Webb. I'm so sorry. Yeah, he'll probably slap me when he hears me stumbling around where I forgot his name. But he wrote a book called The Great Taking, and I had never read the book. And a constituent up here made an appointment and sat down at a restaurant with me and said, "You might not have read this book." And I said, "No, I haven't." And what's it about? And they started looking at it, and they're going over it with me over some Mexican food we're eating. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, how can that be? Well, wait a minute, something's wrong with that. And so I said, well, somebody needs to run a bill to stop this in Tennessee because people don't know this. And so that's what I ended up doing. And there's a lady who used to be a state representative named, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm about ready to cough, dealing with the cold. She's out of North Dakota, and she used to be a state representative up there, and her name's Betty Grandy, and her husband is Don Grandy. He's a lawyer for a couple of different institutions, and he wrote a bill actually for me that straightened up two things in the UCC code. Now, most people think that when they buy stock, that they own it. And you did up until 1994. And all the UCC code dealing with stocks was changed, and the whole system was changed where you didn't get a certificate anymore, a piece of paper that had your name on it and a number on there, and that you owned X amount of shares. This certificate said you had X amount of shares of stock in such and such a company. Excuse me. I'm sorry. But they don't do that anymore. It's all electronic, and you don't have a piece of paper anymore. Now, if you still have a piece of paper, you better hang on to it, because that is real stock, and you can go get your property back with that. But most people don't have that anymore. It's all electronic, and they think that they own their stock, but that's really not true. Their stock goes into a pool, and a big pool. Everybody's does. And it's about two levels above your broker. And all the stock in those pools, and if you've had David on your program, he's explained to you that they are being used as collateral for loans on all kinds of millions of different kinds of loans or derivatives, where the value of that stock is used as collateral for those trades and those derivatives. If you have a financial collapse, then the big banks who have used your stock as collateral for a loan, they're first in line to come take your stock or the value of it to fulfill the obligation of that loan. Now, this happened in 2008 when Lehman Brothers went under. All the loans that Lehman Brothers had made with the big banks and connected to them, they were the big banks, the too big to fail banks, went to the pools, and they pulled out the stock to cover those loans. And some of the minor players, it took them 5 years to get their money back. Some of the bigger players took them 15 years to get their money back, and that was just on a small collapse.
Who are these big players these big banks that can just come down and take that collateral?
They're the too big to fail banks, the Wells Fargo, those type banks.
Okay.
Now David can tell you the money amount that goes with all that, and I can't, but he can. But what this bill does, it also, most people don't realize that if your stock gets stolen like that, in order to try and get it back, you have to go to New York and hire you a New York lawyer and file in the state of New York to get your property back. And excuse me. So this bill just does two things. It says if you if your stock is used as collateral and you can't get it back, you can file your case in the state of Tennessee and it'll be heard here based on Tennessee law that deals with these kinds of suits. You don't have to go to New York to do it.
Okay.
And the second thing it does, it reverses the order of priority on who gets the money back. And it puts the big banks, too big to fail banks, at the bottom of the list and puts the original stock purchaser at the top of the list to get his property back. Now, here's what scares me. I didn't start out being a conspiracy person, but the globalists and my own federal government have pretty much made me that way. Yeah. By the way, there is a benefit to being a conspiracy type person. I don't have myocarditis, but my government has pretty much made me, and the globalists have made me suspicious of everything.
Yeah. As they have with anybody with any sense at this point.
Yeah. The Federal Reserve wants to and is planning on going to a central bank digital currency, and I've screamed now for 3 or 4 years that when that happens, you got to realize that your liberty is gone. And we're going to talk about some gold bills here in just a little bit, but unless you have an alternative, your liberty's gone with a central bank digital currency. And if you do away with cash.
Right.
And if that happens, to usher that in, I don't put it past an orchestrated financial collapse, a big one, because then that opens the door for these kinds of mechanisms to introduce themselves and to take over. That kind of stuff scares me. What scares me worse than that is every state's retirement system is all in stocks.
Right.
And if you get a big enough collapse, I can lose my retirement. Those things are scary. And so this bill, that's all it does, is those two things. It reverses the order of priority on who gets their property back first, and it puts the original stock purchaser at the top of the list. And it says if you got to sue, you can do so in the state of Tennessee.
So let me ask you this about suing in the state of Tennessee. Where is the stock at though? What if the stock is not? What if the stock's in New York, and you sue in the state of Tennessee? Then
yeah, but it was purchased here.
Okay.
So that's where the leverage is at least in this bill. That's what it makes the leverage, is where you got it.
So that entity that you bought it through in Tennessee is now liable.
Yeah, where you lived. I mean, if you live here and you purchased here, then this is where you sit.
Okay.
Last year when I ran it last year, I got to run it again this year. It went through the first committee with only one no vote. But by the time it got to the full committee, a week later, these money boys got their ducks in a row, and they brought out their big guns, and that'd be an interesting thing if you went back and watched that in front of it was in the Civil Justice Committee, that bill was, and listen to them. These boys, I mean, they threatened the whole state of Tennessee. You listen to them.
And who are these boys?
One of them was a Federal Reserve guru. No, he wasn't a Federal Reserve guru. He was a guru with the Uniform Commercial Code itself, and the other one had something to do with. He was a big dog out of New York. I think with the Fed. I might have to make that a correction on that, but I will dig around and find it, and I'll give it to you if you've got to make a correction on what I'm saying. But they brought them in, and boy, like I say, you go listen to it. They threatened the whole state of Tennessee.
What did they threaten them with?
They said if you do this, that people will you won't do business in stocks in Tennessee. People won't do business with you. And then they went as far as to say that people who do business with the people who did business with you won't do business with them either. And it was quite arrogant. But it ended up where somebody on the committee made a motion to send it to summer study, and I got them to promise me that they would have one, and never did. So I hope, and David flew in here from Switzerland or Sweden, whichever he lives in over there. He flew in here to testify, and he testified in the Senate, and that bill sailed right straight through that Senate committee. I mean, went right straight through, and it got balled up on the House side, and so I've got to run that one again. That's a big deal.
You know, it's usually the Senate that stops good bills like that. I mean, the Senate is where most good bills go to die. But interesting to see that happened in the House.
Yep, it was. It really was.
But maybe that's why it sailed through the Senate, because they knew somebody in the House was going to kill it. Because I don't trust a lot of your peers up there, especially some of the so-called leadership. So.
Well, that's the way it happened. But if you go back and listen to that testimony, and what was good about this bill, it was nonpartisan, you know. And if you go back and look at the first committee that I presented in, Antonio Parkinson, you know, and I like him awful well. Boy, he was on top of this. I mean, he was asking more questions than the Republicans were asking, and he was asking more questions than the conservatives were asking. And boy, he was all about it. And it's nonpartisan. I mean, people, you start talking about them losing their money, you know, people get interested no matter what party they're in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you got that bill will be back. Now, who's the Senate sponsor?
Paige Wally is the Senate sponsor.
Okay, does it have a number yet, either one of those bills? Have you guys actually filed them, or is that just what you're going to be filing?
No, I haven't filed them yet. I actually try to hang on to all mine and file them about the same time, so I get consecutive numbers that are all grouped together.
Okay.
So I haven't filed them yet.
Okay. All right. Anything else on that, or are we ready to talk about the WHO/UN bill, or did you have a bullion bill that you wanted to talk about? Yeah,
that's another big deal too. I've been working on a gold depository for 9 years, and I think this one we very well may get somewhere with this one. I thought we had it last year, and it fell apart towards the end, but this bill looks at establishing a depository where both the state can store gold and precious metal, but individuals can store it as well. But it also has a basis to do a transactional business on it, or a transactional arm of it, which which means I don't know if you've ever seen a glint card or heard about that company.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. It means if you've got, let's say you've got $50,000 worth of gold in the depository. This bill, excuse me, allows, it lays the framework to where down the road we can establish a system, not with a standard credit card like Bank of America or Visa or any of those others, because you're at their mercy as well. They can shut your account down whenever time they want to. I mean, that's what they did in Canada with those truck drivers. But your own card that will allow you to transact business based on what's in your account, the value of what's in your account with gold. And you can go to Walmart and give them your card, and they will run that just like they do any other credit card. And it will take the amount of what you purchased off of the total amount of what your gold is worth in the depository on that day, what gold is trading for on that day.
Right.
And of course, the benefit of gold is, in part of this gold bill too, instructs the treasurer to buy between 1% and 3% gold to store itself. Excuse me, for the state of Tennessee on a yearly basis. But that's what I'm trying to get to, is an ability to transact, because gold, of course, keeps up with inflation.
Right.
If you paid for a brand new car in 1923 with so much gold, that same amount of gold will buy you a brand new car today.
Right.
Because the value is kept up with whatever inflation is. And
let me ask you a question about that. So you've got $50,000 worth of gold in this account, and you go to a store and you spend 25, 30, whatever. How do they compute how much? What increments are the gold in? Does it have to? Is this to tell you what kind of increments it has to be in so that they can deduct small amounts? Because gold's going for what, $2,700 an ounce now?
Yeah, and they do have, and I don't even know what it is. They do have little teeny increments that are pretty small. And to be honest with you, I have no idea what they are, and I don't know what the value or how it changes day to day based on the value of what gold is.
Right.
There's lots of other people who know more. They really know everything there is to know about that. I just wanted a system where you just didn't have $50,000 worth of gold sitting in the depository. What do you do with it?
Right.
How do you use it? Which in this bill also it makes gold and silver legal tender in the state of Tennessee.
Great.
Which is on its face a good thing, because from what I understand, right now you have to pay capital gains tax on whatever profits you make out of having gold, and gold really is cash. It really is the only cash that's real. But from what I understand, if the state declares it as legal tender, then it's currency, and you don't have to pay tax on that. Okay. There is an argument on whether it has to be coins or whether it applies to bullion too. But anyway, that's the whole focus of the bill, is to have a storage where the state can put it in, where the public can put it in, but they can also transact on it. Okay. If you go to a central bank digital currency, it does not bind you down like it does everybody else as far as you losing liberty.
Yep. Well, I think we definitely need gold, silver, and I like the idea of this glint card as well.
Coupled up with that, I'm just going to tell you this, but I'm not going to go into detail about it, but there's a reason for it. But coupled up with that is the establishment of a Tennessee mint, where we have the ability to mint our own coins.
That'd be great. So that's part of the bill, or is that another bill?
That's another bill that goes with it. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Are you getting support on this? On either one of those?
Yeah, from the people who know about it. Yeah. Most people understand that the the dollar bill is shrinking, and most people understand that inflation is eating up, what they make.
Yeah.
And they understand that if they know anything about a central bank digital currency, they're fearful of it.
Right.
And they should be.
Yeah.
So yeah, most people see the common sense in it, and that it's a good position to begin to put the state into.
Yeah.
And individuals too. So I'm hopeful that it'll come to fruition this year.
I hope so too. Now the WHO and UN bill, or bills.
Excuse me. Yes, it's Karen Bracken has worked really hard on working on this bill, and Senator Pody has one too, and actually I've got to meet with him. We were going to try to put these bills together and kind of come up with a synergistic bill that covers it all. But what it basically says is these globalist organizations have absolutely no authority in the state of Tennessee, and that cities and counties or other government institutions in the state of Tennessee cannot enter into agreements with them, cannot implement their directives. For example, just like climate change is one of the biggest ones.
Right, and I think hopefully Trump will take care of a lot of that. But
I hope so.
But that doesn't mean that we don't need to be ready for anything that slips through the cracks.
Well, you got 4 years from now. If 4 years from now another Biden goes in office, it'll be the same thing. He'll spend the first day doing everything, voiding everything that Trump did and going right back into all this stuff. Because I'm telling you, the globalists do not quit. They will not quit. They're relentless.
Yep.
They want to control the world, and they cannot control the world unless they do away with individual sovereignty and state sovereignty.
Yeah, and that's what they're working towards, and that's another reason. To me, that's just another argument for the fact that because a lot of this is implemented by our federal government, that the states cannot just be at the mercy of the federal government and allow them to do just anything they want. They have to stay in their lane. They have to stay in their Article 1, Section 8 lane. But they're not going to do it on their own. The states have to keep them there.
Well, Karen brings up a good point about that, and she's right. The World Economic Forum doesn't just walk into the state of Tennessee and go to the city of Knoxville and say, hey, we want you to implement this new program, and we'll pay you $5 million to do it. They don't do that. They go through the federal government and some arm of the federal government and some environmental protection agency of the federal government, and then the federal government comes to the city of Knoxville and says, hey, why don't you implement this program? So this bill, and we're already getting blowback from it, but this bill says if this is a policy the World Economic Forum wants and promotes and pushes, a city or a government entity cannot implement it, even if it's coming from the federal government side. So actually, the bill is almost a nullification bill.
Good.
Honestly.
The more the merrier. And as I understand, the AG's position is, the states can't tell the federal government that they can't enter into an agreement with our counties. Is that accurate?
There are some concerns that they had. Yeah. Actually, I was on a phone call with about 3 of them, and this is no excuse. My 96-year-old mom she was in and out of the hospital there, and I was trying to listen to them and make sense of what they were saying, and anyway, I asked them to send it to me in an email in written form,
right,
so that I could look at it, and they promised to do that. I haven't gotten that yet, but. That I did get some objection from that office over it.
Right, which is totally garbage because the counties are subdivisions of they thought that in this case the counties did not create the state of Tennessee. You know, unlike the states creating the federal government, the counties did not create the state of Tennessee. The county governments are just subdivisions of the state government, and they're, you know, the state can tell the counties what to do. All right, and they're doing it in Memphis. I mean, in terms of the gun, they had the gun control garbage on their ballot there in Memphis, and the state, the AG's office, say, no, you don't get to do that. You don't get to make those calls.
Yeah, I've been told that we violate the home rule law, which I'm really not sure I know all about that. But you are correct. The state, the city doesn't dictate the state. The state dictates the city.
Right.
I want to tell you about one more before you go. It's an important bill. Here's what scares me. This deals with vaccines for cattle and hogs and chickens. You know, the last time I went down this road 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there was a genetically altered virus that was released that was designed to create more harm than it would normally. And it was somehow mysteriously released. And at the time, somebody said that it was caused by some ugly old bat. And I said, well, Pelosi swears she didn't have anything to do with it. But somehow, mysteriously, this virus gets released. And immediately following comes a universal worldwide fear campaign that scares everybody to death, even though the real numbers showed the survival rate's like 99.4%.
Right.
And then following this huge, massive fear campaign, all of a sudden comes a brand new, genetically modified and altered
vaccine. Yeah.
And then comes the push to force everybody to take this new shot. What I anticipate is the same system to be used with livestock. There will be a release or a new virus that's going to kill all the stock and kill all the cattle and kill people too that eat it. And right behind that will come a fear campaign, and right behind that will come a new genetically altered vaccine.
Yep.
And in the state of Tennessee, the legislature sometime in the past said that if the governor declares an emergency, I'm not sure if the state vet can declare it, but the state vet under an emergency, they can walk on your property anytime. They can test any animal you got. They can tell you to kill every animal that they tell you to kill, or they can kill it, I suspect. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And it's all in the name of stopping this virus from spreading.
That they created.
Yeah. Now, what scares me about that is, you know, you have globalists, just like Bill Gates, who, if you ain't figured it out yet, they want to starve you to death.
Yep.
And there is an effort to do that. And I've got a bill that I ran last year, and it got sent to summer study, never got a summer study on it. But the bill said if you've never vaccinated, then a state vet cannot force you to take any vaccine in your cattle or your hogs or your chickens or your turkeys or anything else. I got a whole bunch of blowback from that and a whole lot of fighting over it.
Who are you getting the blowback from?
Oh, my own ag department was terribly upset with it and against it, and of course they say, you know, you'll stop the cattle trading business out of Tennessee. We won't be able to trade with anybody if we can't show the cattle's been vaccinated, and you'll hurt this and that. And not only that, but what if people get sick and die from it? And you know, you're just you know, they were dead set against it, and I'm still wrestling with the bill on the best way to write it, but to me this is a very big deal and it's an important issue. particularly when it comes to, just like you said before, the Constitution's supreme. And back in COVID, I argued I can't find anywhere in the Constitution when the president or governor or anybody else declares an emergency that the Constitution gets suspended. I can't find that anywhere.
It's not there.
So, to me, for a state agency to be able to walk on your property and and either kill your property or force you to do something with your property, to me is blatantly unconstitutional, whether you're declaring an emergency or not. But I'm wrestling with, maybe I should approach it a different way. Maybe I should say, if you have only this amount of cattle and less, or you only have this amount of hogs and less, it doesn't apply to you. What I wanted to do and what I'm trying to do is still have some pools of good meat that you can grow and propagate and build on, so people don't starve to death.
Yeah. It's a shame you have to plan for these things, because you really have no reason to trust your own government, or certainly any international agency. So.
Yeah, it scares me, just the amount of headway that globalists have made. You go look at the UN's One Health.
Yep.
And what their goals are and what they want to do.
Yep.
And then I find out last year that in the state of Tennessee, in my own ag department, we have a One Health.
Yep, and it's on the website. You can, anybody out there doubts it, just Google One Health Tennessee. It'll take you. It's a state website, state government website. It's got One Health. It's got all the links to the national or the federal and the global organizations. So it's a mess.
It's here. I never realized how many inroads. Of course, these folks, globalists, don't, like I said, they're relentless. They don't quit.
Yeah.
And their goal is to do away with all sovereignty anywhere and to control the world. And that's where they're at.
Yep. Yeah. They're essentially communist. That's what they are. Yep. And we used to recognize this when we still had the Soviet Union, that the goal of communism was to control the world. Well, the communists now, there's no longer a Soviet Union. China's full of communists. But the communists now are in these different global agencies and entities. And unfortunately, we got a bunch of them in our federal government. And I'd say several in our state, from some of the stuff that I've seen go on. Unfortunately, not all of them are Dems. From some of the garbage I've seen come from our side, I'd have to say some of them are communist. Anyway, I don't want to keep you too long. I do want to ask you, unless you got any last things you want to put out, because I do have one more quick one for you.
I'm running a bill for David Seal called it's a property protection right that kind of rewrites the eminent domain ability of particularly housing authorities. It changes the verbiage in the bill. I mean, he spent a lot of time on this. Just an overview. It just says that if a housing authority wants to take property under the blighted clause that's in existing law, that they have always gone on a blighted area, and you might have 3 houses in a whole neighborhood that are actually blighted, but all the rest of them aren't, to take the whole area, the whole neighborhood. Wow. And this changes that and says it has to be blighted property and it has to be specific, right, so that you can't just go scoop up a whole area and take people's property away when they really don't fall into what the law intended. Good bill, definitely needed.
So the special session, vouchers, Hurricane Helene funding, and illegal immigration. What do you know? What have you heard about? We know the governor wants his damn vouchers. Okay, I mean, the guy's been harping on vouchers since day one.
He ran them.
And they've been twisting arms. We got this big investigation going back to that time frame, his first year in office. And there's, accusations of some things that were done improperly in terms of trying to buy votes. And I'm just hoping everybody that was legitimately bribed, I don't know, legitimately bribed, everybody that was in fact bribed or coerced. I hope that's all brought out. I think the governor, you don't have to comment on this. My opinion, the governor is scum for pushing that kind of garbage, whether you like the bill or not, pushing that, using that kind of pressure on these guys. And I just hope it all comes out, and I hope everybody that deserves to get dealt with is dealt with. But he's here trying to push through the voucher, and I guess he's using the hurricane funding and the illegal immigration as, I guess, to dress up the special session a little bit.
Well, I mean, I asked the question, and what I've been told is that these are three big issues. I mean, they're not all in one bill. These are three different issues, going to have three different bills. But
right.
But that we need to deal with them, and of course we should have. To me, the hurricane relief up here.
Yep.
We should have, and there have been people who have been working on that ever since that happened. But that needs a structured funding system that the legislature needs to vote on to get that done.
Yeah, I would have thought that would have been a special session on its own probably a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it could have been.
But if we were giving away $1 million to a company somewhere, or billions of dollars to a company, we would have already had a special session for that. Not so much for hurricane victims, right?
Yeah, that comes in regular session.
Okay.
But yeah, it'll be interesting. You know, I got to tell you, where I live, it is the only time in 10 years I have ever seen this on a bill, where if you take, you know, I represent everybody in my district. Doesn't matter what party they are. I'm their representative. But if you take the conservative folks, and I listen to them more, I do. But you take the conservative base that I got up here. This is the first time that I have ever seen in 10 years I've been down there a bill where it is split, where half of the conservative base I have says vote for the bill, and the other half say don't vote for the bill. It's the first bill that I have ever seen like that.
On the vouchers?
Now, on this voucher deal. Yeah.
Right.
Now, it might be, I mean, I'm sure that might be just unique to a few counties, but it's the first time I've ever seen that.
Right.
And these are really good people, sound people. You know, they're not crazy, but that's the first time I've ever seen that. Now, other counties, I talk to other legislators, and they'll say it's more like 80 against and 24.
Yeah.
And then some counties will say, well, the majority of people in my county or my district seem to want it. So.
Right. And I think probably if you're in more rural district, I don't know where you're going to send your kids for the vouchers. I mean, I don't see how it helps rural districts. But, you know, my issue is not, I mean, I don't think the vouchers are a good idea, but I really, really just the push and emphasis on this is kind of irritating to me when here we got the same state government that's essentially telling, okay, we failed to provide good public schools or to hold the people in the public schools accountable so that they were doing, you know, providing the kind of education needed, but give us some more money and we're going to fix it all. I'm just like, no, you haven't done good with what you've already done. You want us to trust you to do something else? I don't think so. But anyway,
it's you know, I voted for the first go around there when they took Davis and Shelby County and then Hamilton County later to it. But the reason I did that, you know, Memphis has 28 failing schools. They haven't failed 5, 10, 15 years. They've been failing 50 years.
Right.
They got 28 of them.
Yep.
Davidson County's got 21.
Yep.
I don't know how many Hamilton County's got, but I went to Memphis to visit a couple schools, and I met some people out there, and I'll never ever forget it. I had this black lady who came up to me, and she grabbed a hold of my arm right there, my bicep, And she looked me right in the eye and she said, I want you to know something. She said, I would rather my kids be uneducated than to send them down to this hellhole called a public school where my kids are going to come out either on drugs, they're going to come out belonging to a gang, or they're going to come out dead, or they're going to come out on the way to penitentiary. She said, I would rather they be uneducated than to send them there. And she looked at me, and her eyes watered up, and she said, please help us. Now, I got to tell you, that changed my paradigm.
Right.
And I voted for that. But I don't know how you fix a place like Memphis.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think no amount of money will fix a place like Memphis. It's not money's not the issue.
No, and there are some schools I think that are trying they're trying to do better and trying to come up with some of this, but good grief, the failure rate is huge, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not on education committee, and glad I'm not, because I don't know what you do with that.
Right. Have you heard anything on what what they might talk about in reference to illegal immigration? You know anything about those bills that might be brought forth in the special session?
No, I haven't seen any of them, and I don't know what they are, and I don't know if the governor has an inside track on what President Trump plans to do, or how he plans to do it, or what involvement in state government he needs.
Right.
So I'm suspecting that will come out on what we need to do, or planks we need to lay so that this goes as smoothly as it can go.
Okay.
And effectively as it can go.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, but I don't really have any information on it.
That's fine. Hey, look, I really appreciate you coming on, taking your time, and I appreciate what you do. You know, you're always fighting a good fight, and we definitely need more like you up there. And so once again, thanks for coming on, and we'll definitely be in touch. Like to have you back on maybe a little later in the session. We'll see how some of these bills go. But thanks again for being with us.
Yeah, I'd be glad to, and like I told you before, it's cold. It's colder than a mother-in-law's heart, so stay warm.
That's a good one. Take care. I appreciate you.
I'll see you.
Have a good one. Once again, in reference to the nullification process bill, you can go to tncss.weebly.com, and all the information you need there. You can get the information about petitions to your legislature for it. And eventually we're going to have postcards to send to the actual committee members once we have that path, once we know that path, exactly which way it's going and who to send them to. And there's a lot of other good information on that website in reference to the Constitution, nullification, and issues like that. So that's a good site to visit. Hey, once again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Make sure you hit the like or subscribe buttons. That really helps with our viewers, and just sign up for the newsletter so that you don't miss an episode. Like us on Facebook, like us on Twitter. And our guest next week will be Danielle Goodrich with East Tennessee Freedom. And the topic will be, well, we're just going to talk about the weather modification, that is. Weather modification and other issues, other things going on in Tennessee. So hope that you'll join us. Thank you for being with us tonight. And take care. See you next week. That's it for tonight. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.